right, we had a little technical difficulty there. We are on live now. Thank you everyone for joining us here at Local 5 YouTube channel, and we are going to be talking about what we've been talking about all day long, the Derecho. A year ago today, that Derecho went through central Iowa, it went through Illinois, it went through like 10 states. I mean, it was a big storm system. It turned out to be the most costly thunderstorm ever in the history of the United States. I mean, it was a big deal. It's like a once-in-a-lifetime almost event. Let's hope it is anyway, because it was so devastating. Personally, I was out without power in Ankeny for 3 days, my neighbors, everybody, and there were hundreds of thousands of people without power for a long time, and it just caused a lot of devastation. It was a deadly storm as well. So we're going to be taking your questions tonight, so you can go ahead and send those to us via YouTube, or you can text them at 515-457-1026. You can text those questions to us, and we'll be answering those as we go through the night. So just send them away. And you can see behind me, actually, there's the loop of the Derecho going right now. That is courtesy of the environmental mesoset night. It is basically a big thunderstorm complex, really intense thunderstorm complex that got so organized. It was really unusual because we were thinking there could be severe weather going the night before into that day, but it turned out, I guess it was Sunday into Monday. So Sunday night, some of the models were showing a bow echo, but there's a big difference between just a bow echo and thunderstorm or a derecho, because it is much bigger, much more intense, and it lasts for a long time. That's really the difference. Sometimes bow echoes last a couple of hours. Derechos actually last many hours, and this one was especially long, starting in the morning hours and going until basically after sunset. It died in Ohio. So started in South Dakota, went all the way to Ohio, traveling at about 55 to 65 miles per hour. Just like a car driving down I-80 is basically what it did, and caused devastation all along the way. That's why it was the most costly thunderstorm ever, at least thunderstorm complex ever in the history of the United States. So I have Holly, my producer, in my ear, and if you have any questions, Holly, go ahead and send them my way. Okay, the question is, what's the likelihood of another derecho hitting Iowa? Well, they happen, actually, it happens about every 10 years that we get a strong derecho come through, but this one was the top of the list, actually. I would think it's more of every 50 years, but we do see derechos about every 10 years that are pretty strong and pretty memorable, but this one will probably not be repeated in your lifetime, I doubt, because plus, will it hit your area? So it could happen, say it starts in Kansas and goes down into the southeastern U.S. That could happen and you wouldn't know about it because it didn't affect you personally, but for you to see something like this in your lifetime, it's probably once in a lifetime to actually be in that zone. It's kind of like a eclipse of the sun. You know, if you're not in the right spot, you're not going to notice it, but this was definitely something we noticed a year ago today here in Iowa. And we had some of the strongest winds here in Iowa. The winds were up to 140 miles per hour, and that's estimated. But that was in northeast Iowa, around Cedar Rapids and those areas. We had winds measured 126, so they were measured at 126. That is up around a tornado strength. It was like a hurricane. It was really like a hurricane went right through the state of Iowa. Just very impressive out there. Holly, you got any more questions there? Okay, so the question coming in is, what does climate change have to do with derechos, if anything? Well, there's been some studies on that, and generally speaking, it didn't cause this derecho. It's a weather event. We'll talk more about how it happened, but you can't necessarily blame this on climate change or global warming. However, we do notice that we are seeing more extreme weather events happening, and we know that because we've had records go for 130 years, okay? So if something happens that's unprecedented and it took 130 years to happen, then something's changing. And it's really the frequency of these type of events Even with flooding, like sometimes we used to have what we call a 50-year flood or a 100-year flood. Well, sometimes those are changing because they're happening more often, and that is really partially, or maybe completely, but certainly partially attributed to global warming, climate change. You think about it this way: if you've got a machine that's working, let's say the weather is like a big machine and it's operating at a normal pace. Let's say you increase the temperature, which is basically increasing the energy. So you rev the engine, basically. We're revving the engine of weather, and it creates kind of bigger events, let's say. It creates more hurricanes. It creates heavier flooding. It creates maybe more tornadoes. It creates derechos. So that's what we're looking at. It's that kind of increasing the intensity and the frequency of severe weather. I think that definitely can be attributed to, at least partially, if not completely, to climate change, because we are seeing more and more of these events out there. So it's just science, basically. It's just happening more and more often out there. And I want to talk a little bit about how it happened, because like I said, Sunday night into Monday, it didn't really look like it was going to be too bad. Now, we have what we call a severe tracker here, and my meteorologist Sunday night had a level 2 here, which is pretty good. And he did say there could be severe weather here. No one expected this. I mean, even that morning, there wasn't much going on. I was at home in Ankeny, and I saw the thunderstorms coming into northwest Iowa. They look like typical thunderstorms, and it looked like they would probably maybe die off. Like they may not even make it to Des Moines. So I wasn't too worried about it. But as the morning went on, they stayed pretty strong. And then by the time they got just west of the metro, we're talking Carroll County, Greene County, that's when they really started to rev up. And by then they're moving at 50 miles per hour, and they're causing devastation. That's when it really started to take the form of a derecho out to the west of the metro. And there wasn't much time to react. So I stayed at my home in Ankeny, and I had 2 meteorologists here, and they were covering it, doing a very good job out there. Of course, we had 80-mile-per-hour winds at my house. I was literally holding some windows in my out in my patio, trying to keep them from breaking because they were blowing so bad. It was the worst storm I'd ever seen in my life. 80-mile-per-hour winds. I went out afterwards with my camera to do some video of the damage. It was just kind of surreal, and I'm sure everybody has those experiences, or if you lived through this and you went outside, it was just very surreal with the damage around, trees down. It looked like a hurricane went through, and it really kind of was like a hurricane, but we didn't expect it to be that bad. And it's one of those things where everything happened that could happen to make it worse. So it's like we had a chance of thunderstorms Sunday night, didn't happen. So that left the atmosphere very ripe for thunderstorms. And I'll tell you what, that humidity was so high, not unlike what it is today, actually. You go back a year ago, it was similar to what we had today. It was hot and humid in the morning. Temperatures were already, mid-80s we were probably by 10 o'clock. It was probably 86 degrees already. It was humid. So those thunderstorms rolling in here said, hey, this is pretty good air, good juicy air. So those thunderstorms got stronger and stronger. That was only one part of the equation. So we had a good thermal environment with heat and humidity already in the late morning hours. Then we had a jet stream favorable to push in cool air, kind of an inflow, or the backside inflow where it's pushing in cold air at the mid levels. And that creates instability. So you got warm air down here, you got cold air up here, a lot of instability, a lot of lift and motion, and they just started plowing, literally like a snow plow. This thing just started working its way through the atmosphere with a lot of force. And really, you get those strong winds that come from up above. A lot of times that cold air is coming in from up above, that jet stream, and it gets bent to the ground. So we're seeing that translation of energy from mid-levels down to the lower levels, producing those incredibly strong winds. So it's basically like bringing the jet stream down to earth is what happened, and that's what we were dealing with that derecho that day. Just an incredible storm out there. So everything went wrong basically to make that derecho happen. And like I said, probably once in a lifetime. So Holly, what do we have coming in? Yeah. So a viewer is asking, compare this one to other ones that I've seen. And I was doing a little bit of research. There was one in 1998 that was pretty memorable. There was one in 2010. So it really is almost every 10 years, right? So they're not, you often see bow echoes. So we talk about bow echoes and they usually happen and they might last an hour or 2 or 3. That's not what Duratios do. Duratios last a long time. That's why they're basically given a separate name, because they're a long-lasting bow echo is what it basically is. And I have never seen anything like this. This is something I hope I never see again, because it just, you know, it's very cool in a sense meteorologically. It's very interesting, but it just, you don't want to see this happen anywhere because it's too devastating. It was deadly. It caused all kinds of damage to the farms, to the trees, to the houses, people's lives destroyed. So yeah, it's just amazing weather, but just devastating, and I hope we never see it again. And chances are, I don't think we would, but you never know, because things are happening more frequently than they used to happen. And I did look up, now people say, what is Derecho? What is that word? It's actually a Spanish word that means direct or straight. And I looked even further, and it was actually a term that was coined back in the late 1800s. So late 1800s, it was actually a professor of physical sciences at the University of Iowa, which kind of kills me to say that because I'm an Iowa State Cyclone, but this professor of physical sciences from the University of Iowa coined the term Derecho back in the late 19th century. He was distinguishing between storms with winds blowing straight and from tornadoes that have circular winds. So even he knew that there was a difference. You know, when a storm goes through, if the winds are circular, it was probably a tornado. If they're straight line, it might have been this, a derecho. But that's where it came from. His name is Gustav Detlev Heinrichs. And that was back in the late 1800s, the University of Iowa. So that's pretty cool. I didn't know that till today. I looked it up. So Holly, what do we got next? Yeah. So the question is, how has the job changed since then? And we have an interesting story. If you haven't seen it, it is on our weareiowa.com page. Taylor Canoost, my midday meteorologist now, he did a story about that, and you can go look at that. But modeling is the key, and we have faster computers than ever before, which helps model. So modeling is basically trying to mimic the atmosphere. So we put in the data, like we could put in radar data, we could put in atmospheric data, and we could put in all these sounding data from weather balloons. And these computer models are getting better, and they're getting faster because we have stronger computers, faster computers. So they're working on methods now to say what's the worst case scenario, basically. It runs all the scenarios. So a lot of times we run a model, it may run 5 different ways or whatever, but this runs even more. It just really looks at every possible solution and gives you an idea of, like, this could happen. So we need to know what could happen, not maybe what will happen sometimes, because who knows what will happen. That's, you know, that forecasting life is impossible. It's like if you could forecast who's going to win a football game, you'd be rich. But you can't. You cannot always accurately predict the future, even in weather. But you can look at the probability of we could have a pretty big storm, a derecho. So the models are starting to do that, and I would encourage you to look at that story that Taylor Canoost did on that. And then Brandon Lawrence also did a story on the effect to our agriculture here in the state, which was devastating, not to mention the trees, but also, you know, some of the crops from last year are still recovering this year because all the corn got knocked over and it's trying to come up. So you got volunteer corn, and it just makes a big mess of the field. So there's a lot of issues that still repercussions from that storm. But yeah, the question basically, yeah, we are trying to, you know, better model these types of events. And I do remember looking Sunday night at one of our high resolution models, and it did show a bow echo, but then a couple of runs later, it wasn't anything. It went away. So the model sometimes would say, yes, it could be severe weather. The next a couple hours later, it's like, nothing's going to happen. So it wasn't a sure thing, and like I said, everything happened just right for it to happen that way. Even at 9 o'clock in the morning, no one really thought it was going to be that bad. It was about 10 o'clock when it was like, oh crap, this is bad. And that's when it just took off and went right on down I-80 and caused all that devastation. So we're about halfway through here. So what you got there, Holly? Oh, yeah, the question is, can you predict a derecho now? Yes and no. I mean, you know, we're still having that issue, will it happen? It's kind of like even predicting a tornado. We don't actually predict tornadoes, you know, 6 hours in advance. We predict the conditions that produce tornadoes. So it's basically here's what it'll come down to, I think, in the future. It'll be like when they put out a tornado watch, maybe someday there'll be a derecho watch. I mean, that is a possibility. If that devastating type of a system is possible, they may come out with a new type of a watch. I'm just kind of thinking outside the box here. I haven't read anything or heard anything about this coming down the pike, but it really could be that way because the Storm Prediction Center in Oklahoma City, they issue all the watches for the entire country. So they're the gurus, they're the experts, and sometimes they get it wrong, by the way, but it's hard to do. But they may have a day when they issue a Duratio watch, possibly, and that would have been a day to issue one, right? And then you would know, okay, this is not just a normal severe thunderstorm, this is a Duratio watch, which would be worse. And what's interesting, people don't really realize that winds are not linear, or the force, let's say this, the force of the wind is not a linear equation. So let's put it this way, if you have winds of 50 miles per hour and you have winds of 100 miles per hour, that's not twice as strong. The force is actually 4 times as strong. Think about that. So 50 miles per hour and 100 miles per hour, it's 4 times as strong as the 100 is. So the 100 is 4 times stronger than the 50 as far as the force it puts on buildings and trees. And that's why you see such rapid increase in damage. You go from 50 to 100, it is amazingly different. 50 almost does nothing. The trees sway. You might lose a couple tiny little limbs the size of your pinky. It gets up to 100, then it's serious. And it gets above 100, you continue with that same logic. It is basically the square of that. So the force is the square of the speed, essentially. And that is why we see so much damage. And when you get tornadoes of winds of 200 plus miles per hour, it's devastating damage. I mean, even the foundations are moved. You know, the whole house is gone. All that's left is the basement. And it's pretty amazing. So what we got next, Holly? Yeah, somebody's asking about Marshalltown. Why does it seem Marshalltown has been hit so much, so frequently lately? Yeah, I mean, it does feel like that way, doesn't it? We've had tornado, Derecho hit pretty hard, and even this year we've had some pretty bad weather in that area. So it's been a rough time in Marshall County and Marshalltown, and all I can say is it's bad luck. It's kind of like when Ankeny got 10 inches of rain a couple years ago and caused the flooding. It was really, you know, Des Moines had 5 or 6, but Ankeny got the heaviest rain that time around. Somebody's going to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and sometimes it just happens to be in the same area. It is, all I have to say, it's just random. And sometimes you can flip a coin and it'll be heads 5 times in a row. It happens, you know, just those random events that seem to be like you're cursed. It feels like you're cursed, and I felt that way before. When I've wanted rain, and everybody's like, "Oh, there's a bubble over my area because it never rains here. It always goes around us." And everybody has that experience from time to time. And I would say, if you average everything out over 100 years, it probably will all average out. But in your 10 years, 20 years, it may not average out. You may come up short on rainfall. You may have more severe weather. You know, it just weather takes a while to average out as far as everybody getting the same type of weather. Just it's kind of chaos, really. Another question, Holly. That's a good question. So Cindy asks, how long can a derecho stay together? Well, this one stayed together, I believe, about 8 to 10 hours, depending on when they officially say it started. So that's the nature of a derecho versus a bow echo is kind of a baby derecho, and it doesn't last very long. But a derecho part of the definition is it has to last for a long period of time. And I don't know if there's a minimum, maybe 6 hours it has to last. But this one certainly qualified. It was at least 10 hours long, I think, by the time it died in Ohio. So pretty impressive storm, no doubt about it. And I've seen them before, and they're cool to watch because they move so fast. That's what's really amazing about them, is they take on a life of their own. And they're kind of like, I don't care what's in front of me, I'm going that way. And they just plow into these environments that you wouldn't expect thunderstorms. So what's really weird is the people let's say the people in Indiana. The people in Indiana that day, they didn't expect a derecho flying in from the west from I-80, coming out of Iowa. I mean, that's what it did. So pretty crazy weather. But I almost forgot the question. What was the question again from Cindy? I think I lost where I was. Oh, how long? Yeah, they stay together a long time, Cindy. Yeah, 6 to 10 hours, maybe even longer in some cases. But usually they run into something that kills them. All weather is born, all weather dies. Hurricanes are born, hurricanes die. And same way with a derecho. But at least 6 to 10 hours is a pretty good length for a derecho. Any more questions there? Yeah, I should. Okay, so I should have grabbed a water before I got up here. I feel rude if I left my station here, so I won't. I'll just power through this. We got about eight or 10 more minutes. So a question that just came in is, what have we learned about derechos, or what have I learned about derechos? Here's what I've learned about weather. It's very humbling. Forecasting the weather is very humbling. So expect the unexpected. And that's hard for me to say because I want to be so sure of myself, like, oh, it's not going to happen. Oh, it's not going to happen. But it can happen. I mean, it's kind of like some people say, what can happen will happen eventually. I mean, people win the lottery and it shouldn't happen. Astronomically low. Oh, you're so kind. Thank you, Jordan. Jordan to the rescue. So think of it this way. Like I said, things happen that shouldn't happen. You wouldn't think are even possible. So if somebody wins the lottery, that just tells you it does happen. It's kind of like what happened with the derecho or the tornado that we had Sunday night. This storm came out of Minnesota producing a tornado. Well, at 11 o'clock, it's still trying to produce a tornado, and it defying all odds. What can happen will happen eventually. So it's kind of like you got to be prepared for almost anything, any possibility. And the National Weather Service in Des Moines, they do a great job of balancing that act, because you don't want to issue a tornado warning for everything, or, cry, the sky is falling. You can't say that every time, but they do a good job of balancing that, because they have public safety is number one, and it is for us too. So we don't want to break into programming unless we have to, unless we feel like somebody is in danger. And tornadoes, always in danger. Derechos, you're always in danger. Hailstorm, you're probably not in danger, as long as you're not stupid and out in the middle of a hailstorm with baseball-sized hail. But the point is, we do not want to interrupt programming. We want to basically serve our viewers. We don't want to make them upset. So always keep that in mind. So we are always trying to do that for you, and that's what I've learned, just humility, because it is so hard to forecast the weather sometimes, and what can happen will happen eventually. We got any more questions? Okay, that's a good question. A question came in, do derechos happen elsewhere in the world? I'm sure they do. What's interesting about the United States, though, is we have more severe weather in the United States than any other country in the world. I can say that because we have more tornadoes, we have more derechos, we have thunderstorms, and we don't just have air mass thunderstorms. If you go to some of these tropical, rainforests, whatever, they have thunderstorms every day maybe, and heavy rain, but those aren't the same. They're basically just rainmakers. Maybe they, occasionally might have some small hail or something, but this is really the severe capital of the world. The United States is. We have the Gulf of Mexico, we have Canada to our north, and we have the Rocky Mountains here. So we get a good combination of cool air from the north, we get dry air from the southwest, and you get the warm, moist air at the surface. So you basically set that environment up to form weather. It's like creating a bomb almost, really, because you get the dry air sometimes over the top. You get a little thin layer of dry, warm air over the top of this warm, moist air, so it creates a bit of a stability factor. And then you get some cold air above that. So what happens is it's kind of sunny all day, right? And it's heating up the lower level of the atmosphere, and all of a sudden that bomb explodes. It breaks through the warm, dry air from the southwest, and it explodes into a thunderstorm complex, and you get severe weather, tornadoes, whatever, supercells. This is the severe weather capital of the world, bar none, here in the United States. Yep. Ryan, was it Ryan that asked that? Yeah, Ryan. So Ryan asked, was this the fastest a derecho's ever developed? I don't know. I mean, I don't know if they even track things like that. It was very, very fast, though. It really went from, and it tracked about as fast as any of them can. I think it was at 60 to 65 miles per hour, its speed of movement. Of course, the winds were stronger than that, but it's kind of like a hurricane. Hurricanes don't track at 65 miles per hour. They track maybe at 30 at the most. They don't really get going that fast, especially when they're strong. This was tracking at 60, 65 miles per hour at its peak, and it developed pretty rapidly too. So that doesn't give you much lead time. When a tornado is moving 15 miles per hour, it's pretty easy to track that, and it's pretty easy to get the sirens going. With this particular system, though, there wasn't much time to react because it happened so quickly and it was moving so quickly. So yeah, that's a good question, Ryan. I don't know the exact answer to that, but it was one for the record books. Like I said, you'll probably never see anything like that in your lifetime, and let's hope we don't, because it was the costliest thunderstorm complex ever in the United States. And that's, given all the correction for inflation and all that too, it doesn't even matter because it just did so much damage. It was just a path, like a hurricane path of destruction through the middle of the country. Of course, hurricanes do more damage generally than thunderstorms, but this was our little hurricane. We could probably do one more question if you have it, Holly, since we started a little bit late. Somebody's asking if days like August 10th of last year, is that what got me into forecasting and weather and meteorology? Kind of. I mean, I was big into the weather mostly because of my dad. He was kind of a wannabe meteorologist. We would go up on top of our roof and watch the weather, and usually thunderstorms would be developing. It was safe. Trust me, we weren't up there during lightning, but we would watch these clouds and thunderstorms developing up on the roof. So I got really interested in the weather, and I'm just a science geek by heart. I love science. I like to see how things work and the how and the why in the world. So that's really how I got started with the weather. So yeah, that's pretty much how I got started with the weather. Thunderstorms. I love lightning. Just to watch it. It's a pastime for me. I can sit outside and grab a cold one and watch the lightning. We got one more question. Okay, somebody's asking about the eye of the storm, because there's a center of a tornado. I really wouldn't call it an eye in a tornado, but there is a center of the tornado. It's the center of the vortex. But there's an eye of the hurricane. There's not an eye in this. However, it's more like a bow echo. And if you have a comma, if you draw a comma and the top of is the comma head, this thing formed that. So it starts as a bow echo, and then you get the comma head at the top. And that's where we started getting tornadoes to develop. So That's kind of the head of the bow echo is what's happening. It really has a maturity cycle. It starts as a little bow echo and it becomes a derecho, and then eventually it's curving like this and it creates a head at the top on the north side of the bow echo. You get this large complex, this head of thunderstorms, and that was some of the most devastating winds that went through Cedar Rapids and those areas, and also had tornadoes form later in Illinois and parts of Iowa. They had tornadoes touch down because of that circulation right at the top of the bow. So yeah, no center to it, but it definitely has the head at the top of it. So that's all the time we have. I'm glad you were able to join us, the ones that did, and I'm not sure if we'll have this on YouTube. Maybe we'll leave the recording up for others to watch, but we will. I just heard from Holly. We'll have that so you can tell your friends to go look at it if they want to. But thank you for joining us, and you can always count on Local 5 weather to bring you the most accurate forecast. Thanks for watching.